Hello and welcome to the Brothers and Sisters Like These podcast. I'm your host, Brother Emiliano. Today we have with us writer, author, and fellow veteran, Russell Worth Parker. Brother Worth, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brother Emiliano.
Good to see you again. Please, for our viewers, introduce yourself and tell us what you're currently up to.
Okay. So, as you said, my name is Russell Worth Parker. I'm a retired Marine. I did about 22 years of active service, 27 total with the reserve service tacked on. And in retirement, I have become a freelance writer, freelance editor. I voluntarily edit, meaning I don't get paid, for the Lethal Minds Journal, which is a for veterans, by veterans newsletter that serves both the poetic and literary needs, but also analytical needs and highlighting vets doing good things or active service members doing good things. The idea being to provide a place for voices that don't always get heard to be heard. So we really particularly try to cater to the E1 to 03 crowd, feeling like there's plenty of places for field grade officers to pontificate at length. But maybe not enough for everybody else. And we know that there's a whole lot of smart folks out there in the ranks and in the ranks of the veteran community. And so we try to be there for them. That being said, we've, published, I think, probably up to Colonel. I don't think we've published a General yet, but I do know that there is a retired 3-star who subscribes. But anyway, that's me. And then I also edit the Tom Beckby Field Journal, which is the narrative arm of Tom Beckby, a outdoors equipment and clothing company that really focuses on kind of high-end upland and waterfowl hunting and fly fishing and that kind of business. Makes really bespoke, beautiful clothes and gear. And then I write for magazines. I write books. I just turned in my first, or helped, I should say, turn in my first film proposal. And hopefully that'll become something. So I'm doing a lot of stuff.
Quite the range, Brother Worth, quite the range. Not to mention your online classes that you do, with us about veterans and writings, which I've had the pleasure to sit in and learn quite a bit of your style, which is a little different and really good. So I greatly appreciate kind of picking up some pointers from you during those classes. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about. Oh, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about your origin story, your childhood, your youth, military and post-military career.
Okay. I was born in Northeast Georgia. Gainesville, Georgia is where the hospital was, but I was raised predominantly in Athens, Georgia, so I call that my hometown. I did live in the mountains in Southwest Virginia. My parents were divorced really young, and so my mom and I moved up and lived kind of deep in the Allegheny Mountains. Or the Allegheny Mountain chain of the Appalachian Mountains. But we came home to Georgia, and so that was where I spent the majority of my childhood. Big reader, Boy Scout. I was out in the woods a whole lot, not much of a sports kid, but hunting and fishing and just being outside. I was blessed to have a dad who loved fishing and a mom who fed my book addiction, and a scoutmaster in the Boy Scouts who was a retired Special Forces guy, Vietnam vet. And that guy really got me started down the adventure path, and which is what led me to, the kind of service I had once I joined the Marine Corps, commissioned in 1994 out of college, went to the University of Colorado for undergrad. And I did 4 years there. And spent that time as the platoon commander of a Marine Scout sniper platoon, and then as a battalion intelligence officer. Got out because I was a young guy and I was immature and I was not getting exactly what I wanted all of the time, which at that age I thought the military should operate that way, largely as a support system for my adventure sports habit. And it wasn't working out that way. So I went to the reserves, and I was in a reserve unit in Mobile, Alabama, for 8 years total, really. But about 2 of that time I was on active duty, to include a deployment with 2nd Force Recon, which is an active duty force reconnaissance company at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. That deployment occurred while I was in law school. And when I got home from that deployment, I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. And so all of my buddies from Force Recon that were still active duty were in the process of standing up what is now called the Marine Special Operations Command, or MARSOC. So I got an email one day from the Marine Corps that said, "Hey, we're looking for reserve officers to come back to active duty." I thought, "Oh, this is a good way to avoid being a lawyer." I was a prosecutor as an intern at the time in Tallahassee, Florida, and went back to active duty. I was lucky that a buddy of mine from my days as lieutenant was the monitor. Navy folks call it a detailer. I'm not sure what they call it in the Army, but it's the person who tells you where you're going.
Like a branch manager for us.
Yeah. For you guys, a branch manager. And I was also blessed that my CO from my Iraq deployment was now the G3 at the very small and baby MARSOC. And so that ended up with me having orders to MARSOC, and I spent the next 16 years at various places within U.S. Special Ops Command. And then I retired in 2021 out of MARSOC.
Very cool. So you guys were on that Det 1 OG stuff, right? Wasn't that the MARSOC Det 1 stuff?
I was not a Det 1 member, however, probably one of my best friends in the world, and a fellow very talented, I should say, and a very fellow talented writer. Do not want to imply that I am such. But a guy named John Daly, who wrote a really exceptional autobiography called Tough Rugged Bastards about the creation of Det 1. He was a Det 1 guy. A lot of my buddies are Det 1 guys. And then Det 1 was kind of the proof of concept that a MARSOC could exist. And then we stood up, the command, I should say, stood up in February of 2006. And I reported in September of 2006. And as I say, with the exception of some time in D.C. at SOCOM's Washington office in the Pentagon and some time at JSOC, or the Joint Special Operations Command, I was at MARSOC the remainder of, a decade and a half.
Wow. Quite an experience. And we could probably have a podcast or two just on that experience. I remember being at Fort Bragg and being in on one of the special operation combatives that I don't remember if it was just for MARSOC, but MARSOC was in there, and that was mid 2000s. I might have been around 2006, so it was already stood up, but a lot of us didn't know, like, who the hell are these guys with these digital whatever.
We were still figuring out who we were.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought it was cool, and I know there was a lot of resistance from the old school Marines and stuff, but these were mostly young guys who would come over from your recon and force recon and all that stuff. Right. So it was cool to kind of see them there in the birth of all that. So describe how you and brothers and sisters like these, how did we cross paths professionally?
Sure. So I had a occasion to meet Elizabeth Haney, who's a therapist in Asheville, who worked with vets and who wrote a book called, I believe, The Honor Is Mine.
Yes.
And she reached out to me it probably would have been 2019. I wrote a New York Times piece, an essay, and it was one of the first things I ever wrote. And she read it. She reached out to me, told me who she was, and just really was just saying, like, "Hey, I enjoyed your essay. Hey, thank you very much. I'm really, really new to this. This is not, I kind of figured my future was be a retired lieutenant colonel, work at MARSOC, do retired lieutenant colonel at MARSOC things." And so I liked the response I got for writing, and I liked the act of writing. I liked the experience of it. And frankly, I liked the idea of being a writer, which I now tell people all the time, especially transitioning service members, one, don't follow your bliss, follow your talent. But two, I was not ready to get out of the things that I've been doing, which were all relatively intense things that demanded a fair amount of commitment, until, as I like to say, I found something that was as exciting to me as an offset hey-ho insertion into a raid, or a patrol. And I used to love my job, and I loved talking to people about my job. And when people are like, "Oh, you're in the Marines?" Yeah, I am. That's really all they needed to know. And meanwhile, I'm like, "Yeah, let me tell you everything there is to know." You know, just super enthusiastic about it. Um, I'm that way about writing, and I'm that way about veterans writing and the importance of writing to veterans. And so eventually, a few years back, Elizabeth reached out to me, told me what brothers and sisters like these had done and was doing in Asheville, and said, would you be interested in expanding that to the eastern part of the state of North Carolina? We feel like there's an underserved population of vets there. And so after doing some work to figure out what that needed to look like and how to make that work, and getting to know a fair bit of more people in the Eastern Carolina Vet Network, I ultimately figured out that for my efforts, it had to be online. And I had already been connected with an outfit called Dead Reckoning Collective, which is a veteran started, owned, run publishing company. They started with poetry, and then have moved on to broader things, or I should not broader, but I should say fiction and nonfiction and memoir, etc. So I was working with those guys already. I was in my learning how to write phase. I was working with a company called Sofleet, which is a veteran-owned Raider and Special Forces started, exercise outfit. Like you can buy exercise workout programming from them. And so that was a good mix of the cultures that I came from. So I started writing just stories and articles for their website, and it was just an apprenticeship, if you will. And so as I continued to grow that, I think some people noticed that, hey, this guy's pretty passionate about this. I don't know if he's good at it or not, but he's passionate. Um, and I figured out, okay, I can use that network to the benefit of brothers and sisters like these. I originally thought that my efforts needed to mirror and would mirror everything, that y'all have done in the western part of the state of North Carolina, which is amazing. I mean, it's amazing. But again, I figured out that it had to be for my efforts online, and so what that's allowed me to do is serve a population of vets all over the world, rather than, as I thought it would be, a group of folks here in the Wilmington, North Carolina area. And so I've had folks, I had one guy I always talk about, he was on a sailboat in Fiji with his wife and his newborn that was born on the boat. But he's a prior Marine, and he writes. So he would pop up every Wednesday night from Fiji. And that's, and then the one other thing I would say, because I'm running off the mouth, but to answer your question, as the staff at the TBI clinic at Camp Lejeune, or Lejeune, however you choose to say it, saw how effective of a program that brothers and sisters like these is. The staff psychologist, Dr. Jessica Dunham, asked me if I would be willing to turn that program into something in the TBI clinic's therapeutic armory, if you will. So I reached back out to Elizabeth and said, what do you think this would look like? She did some thinking and then sent me her thoughts, which I pretty much go, sounds good. Because I recognize she has expertise and I don't. And so we built that program. And so I do that 6 times a year for 4 weeks a pop as part of the Intrepid Spirit Return to Forces program. That is a purely active duty program for active duty sailors and Marines. I don't think I've ever had any soldier or airman or guardsman or Coast Guardsman, rather. I have had a Coast Guardsman in that program, as well as in the Zoom-based longer 8-week brothers and sisters like these programs. In
Yes, I
fact,
remember.
he's fantastic. Yeah,
Yes, he
great dude.
is. Great guy, great writer. Transitioning, still active duty though, right?
Yes.
Transitioning, or soon to be, So, yeah, Elizabeth, sister, well, to be honest, for our listeners, it's Queen's sister Elizabeth, because we have a couple of Elizabeths, and so we have to prioritize how we name them. So she's been named Queen Elizabeth, and I've named her
Okay.
Queen Sister Elizabeth. And we are right now actively teaching a class at this very moment, towards end of June. That's already been a few classes in, and she's moderating because not only is she an amazing writer, but she's also an amazing counselor, and she's done years and years of service for, especially during the GWAT era, to service members, coming back and dealing with the effects of these counterinsurgency, battlefields that we've had to deal with once we get back home. And so, of course, she still cuts us no slack and makes us give 110%. And we are so blessed to have her in our organization, and so happy that she reached out to you. And that's just, I guess, if you know Elizabeth, that's just what she does. So amazing that
Yeah,
she took
for
that.
my piece of this, it doesn't exist without her.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, full stop. It
Absolutely.
just doesn't exist
Yeah.
if she didn't exist. So she
Well,
gets a whole lot of the credit.
yeah, and as a civilian, we're actually a prompt coming for next week is talking about civilians, and a moment where it just shows that they totally don't get being military means. But she's probably as close as military as I could ever imagine anybody on the civilian side being, that can relate to what active duty veterans are dealing with, psychologically, emotionally, and so we're just so blessed that she's mentoring and helping us with these programs. So since we're on that, also our president, brother Steve, he this last weekend went to Camp Lejeune, brought his wife, got on base, dropped a couple of Benjamins at the PX, and then got some kind of tour where the drill sergeants were still yelling at the recruits, and his wife couldn't believe it. But quite the experience. It was a beautiful thing. And after some 50 odd years after Vietnam, I think it was really cool for him to be able to go back to where it all started as a draftee and reconnect.
Yeah, I think that not those nostalgia moments matter to connect to your past. I was in San Diego 3 or 4 weeks ago now. My godson, son of my best friend, fellow Marine, was getting commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, and it's just, one, makes me feel really old, but two, is cool to see the passing on of those legacies. Some of that is simultaneously wonderful at the discrete micro level, wonderful to see him become a lieutenant and carry that on. Some of it concerns me for the country because increasingly the military is a family business. And I do a lot of work, it's just a self-appointed mission, to try and bridge the civilian and military gap. And I've gone up to the University of Virginia and spoken to folks about it. The essay I wrote in the New York Times that Elizabeth saw in the first place was kind of trying to address that issue. And so I think we're propagating some problems along family lines. But that, if we're going to turn it back on brothers and sisters like these, makes even more important the work that the organization is doing.
Yes, thank you. We actually, as a board, have reached out to our members to ask if their families, direct family members, would be interested in having a group just amongst themselves without veterans, because there's so much that they go through. And we've already had a lot of positive feedback about members saying, oh, absolutely.
I'd really like to hear more about that. I had
Absolutely.
a Marine I worked with years ago now, but his wife was both a very talented and very successful poet, and she wrote a lot about the military spouse experience, and I think that's great. I honestly didn't know y'all were doing that, and I'd like to hear some more about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we just started, kind of like you were saying earlier, it's kind of a proof of concept, and just getting the touchy feely about how people would react to it, and if we could staff it, the numbers, and we just see that it's I'm surprised we haven't done already. And so we're going to definitely link you in on that as we progress on that. Following the writing, could you describe in your experience between writing yourself and what it's done for you on a personal level, and also as a mentor and as a guide for others during these classes that you moderate? What has the therapeutic healing value of physically writing been able to do according to your experiences?
So, I mean, in the most selfish mercenary sense, it's given me a career. And more than that, it's given me a career that is something that I'm really passionate about and that matters to me. It does not pay remotely what some other things I've done in my life have paid, but I don't care because I really like getting up and doing it. As I was talking earlier about finding something that matters to you, like I loved my identity as a Force Recon Marine, right? That meant a lot to me. As I say all the time, I would have crawled naked across broken glass to get jump wings and a dive bubble when I was a second lieutenant because I thought that would prove to the world that I was somebody I wanted to be. Obviously, as an old man now, I figured out you got to figure out how to be that somebody. But at the time, I thought those badges and baubles would mean I was something special. Same with being a Marine Raider. That was my identity for a long time. Now the identity is writer, and selfishly, again, it does so much for me because it's an identity, it's a business, it's an art, a craft, whatever that I have, that I built, that I use, that is me. And so in my business aspect, the product is me. And that's both can be an ego boost and a real bad thing for your ego at times because writing is all about rejection.
And
So
being
there's that.
vulnerable, and putting yourself out
And
there,
being
which is not
vulnerable. And
easy.
that's
Yeah.
the thing that, you may remember I say all the time, and I credit my good buddy David Joy, who lives out there in Western Carolina, with telling me years ago when I first started this, before I'd done any of the stuff that I think has gotten a little bit of notice, or before you guys ever reached out to me, he said, if you want to be a writer, you have to be fearless and vulnerable. And at the time, I was a Marine lieutenant colonel working in the Pentagon, working for the vice commander of Special Operations Command. I was a Marine Raider, a combat vet. Those were my identities. And fearless sounded good, right, to that guy. Vulnerable did not sound cool at all. And I did some talking to a guy who I'm not going to say his whole background, but I'm a guy at a special mission unit and friend of mine. And he really pushed me on the vulnerable part of it. And then I started thinking about it, right? You can't be fearless without being vulnerable, nor can you be vulnerable without at least pretending to be fearless. I've known very few people in my life, and I've known a lot of tough people who were fearless. But anyway, that vulnerability was absolutely key. And so that a friend of mine at an SMU really encouraged me on the vulnerability part of that. And it took somebody who I admired and who I held up within my value system that existed as it did then, to kind of be comfortable moving into that mindset. And David Joy was 100% correct. I think if you're going to write, I tell people now, and I especially say to our veterans that we work with, you've got to write till you're a little bit scared by the writing, and then you need to dig deeper on that until it hurts a little bit, and then you need to dig deeper and bleed on the page, which is a line I stole from Hemingway anyway, right? Writing is easy. All you have to do is tap a vein and bleed on the page. But I believe that, and I believe that's the value of the program, is that it gives people who have grown up in environments where bleeding on the page or anywhere else, figuratively as opposed to literally, is not okay. Bleeding, fine. Emoting, not fine. And so I think, especially in the, I make a distinction between the 8-week brothers and sisters like these class group that I do with kind of a wide array of veterans with wide backgrounds, as opposed to the ones that I work with at the TBI clinic who are almost uniformly Raiders, Recon Marines, and Recon Corpsmen, and Navy EOD folk. So, all special operators. That's a different group. And they are not necessarily a group, and the different groups have different characters. They don't come to write. The 8-week group comes to write. That helps. But I think opening up and telling those stories is incredibly important to veterans welfare. And I say to folks all the time, I am not trying to turn veterans into writers. I am trying to get veterans to write. And that is a totally different thing. So that's one part of it. But I think creating a way for people to get some stuff out of themselves that may be holding them back is great. And so when I do that at the TBI clinic, I say to the Marines and sailors there, I'm taking you on an armory tour. And this is something that those folks get. Some of the, inevitably in the room, that person's an EOD person, that person's a sniper, that person is an expert at CQB, whatever. And I say, so we're walking through the armory, and there's the rocket launchers over here, and here's the mortars over there, and these are the sniper rifles. I'm not a qualified sniper. I'm not going to use the sniper rifles. I feel the same way about music therapy. I enjoyed going through it, but it's just not in my daily practice. But I did yoga when I went through the TBI clinic, and now I do yoga once or twice a week. I'm a writer. I said, so you may love writing therapy and it turns into something that you can do on your own. Or you may go, that was not my thing. And that's fine too. So it's no different than when I say, hey, there's sniper rifles over there. And you go, I appreciate that, but I'm not a sniper. I don't need those rifles. But I am a machine gunner. Can I borrow that machine gun over there? Yes, go ahead and sign that out. And so that's kind of how I think about it and the analogy that I make to our folks. But anyway, I don't know if that answered your question. I was
Oh,
long-winded.
absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely. So along the same lines that we tell people, first thing they tell us is that, well, I'm not a writer. And I say, well, neither are we. I can't even spell or use punctuate properly. But what I can do is write about my experiences, and that's what it's about. And then sharing them in a space with other people that have had similar experiences and can be empathetic and sympathetic towards what our individual experiences has been. And what I've seen is that not only I initially started writing therapeutically for, myself. Then I started seeing that while I was also gaining a therapeutic value out of the writing process, I was also supporting my fellow veterans while they were writing and going through it. And now I'm to the point where their writings have been inspiring me to write in a different style, a different format, a different method. So now I've able to go over some of those pretty traumatic experiences, but from different creative writing angles and forms of expression. So that's made me only a better person and more resilient. So they're kind of unexpected consequences that from writing and the benefits of being in a group writing. So absolutely, we agree. And we never push that this has to be for everybody. This is an experience that you can work in different ways. And we also now, for at least here in the Western North Carolina area, we're extending to first responders because of post Hurricane Helene. And
Oh, sure.
yeah, there was terrible need for it. And what we're doing for them is focusing more on journaling because they can't, because of their schedule, because of the stigma, they can't necessarily be a part of a group the way veterans can. Because I think first responder mental health care is where we were 20 years ago as
I
veterans.
could not agree more with you. And I will say a little further that to me, and I've said this a number of times, mental health in the first responder or military, whatever, that type of personality, right? It's a cascading effect. And it's the same with military equipment. So first you'll have the folks at the special mission units do a thing, whether it's a therapy or whether it's a tactic or whether it's adopting a piece of gear. And the next line will be your other SOF units who will look at that and go, yep, good job, good test bed, we should use that too. So then they take it on. If you look at the way a Marine infantry rifleman is equipped now versus the way a Marine infantry rifleman was equipped during the invasion of Iraq, he or she looks very much like a special operator around 2012, 2014, right? Acquisition timelines may be slower. Well, same with mental health. I will tell you that SOCOM, I think, has done more, and people might disagree with me, probably will, but has done more to fight the stigma of mental health, and it was the same special mission unit guy who said to me, I think, I started seeing a psych, and I'm not going to get into his business. He's like, because to me, it was no different than my lifting coach, my strength and conditioning coach, my nutritionist, all of which were making me the best possible operator I could be. Well, if I get my headspace right too, then, I'm a lethal weapon.
You're a complete
And
package. It just adds
you're a
to your,
complete package.
yeah,
That's right. You,
totally,
you
totally.
are you are the best you can be.
It's just a
And it
force
was only
multiplier.
when he said that to me that I got honest about this sort of thing. Because for years, I would tell you that I was the executive officer of two of the '06 led units at MARSOC. And I was a big preacher to, in air quotes, the guys about, hey, fellas, like, you go see the psych. We have psychiatric folk and psychological folk on staff. We have a clinic right there, the Milam Clinic on the compound. And there were plenty of times when an individual Marine would come to me and start laying out their problems. They called them the couch in my office at one of my exo jobs. They called it the therapy couch. And, Gunny comes in, lays down, Captain comes in, lays down, and we start talking through whatever they got going on. And the truth of the matter is, Marines, sailors, service members in general have stuff. And there were times when I called the psychs over at the clinic and say, I'm bringing somebody over right now. Do you have an hour? Yes. So I walk them over hand in hand. I even sat in on some of their sessions if they wanted me to, if it just felt better to have somebody back them up and say that it's okay to go. Having said all of that, I was kind of full of it because in my head, it was like, yeah, you absolutely should go, but not me. I'm not going. I don't do that. And it was only when I went to the TBI clinic for 5 weeks and went through that program where it was not a question as to whether or not you were going to see the psych or the neurologist or the biofeedback person. You just will, because you're on an armory tour of therapies to see what's going to help you with the rest of your life. That I went, okay, now I've done some reps with the psych once a week. And at the end of the thing, I was like, do I need to keep doing this? And she said, honestly, I think you're one of the more stable human beings I've ever met. But you seem to be getting something out of this. And so 4 or 5 years later, I still see the same psych
That's
every 4 to 6 weeks.
absolutely, yeah. It's just your mental health, fitness, and physical plan, like you said before. It's just part of your daily self care and part of a regimen. And what we saw here at Brothers and Sisters Like These is that we have some very good other local nonprofits that help veterans through different angles, like equine related therapy or
Great thing.
yeah, Veterans Healing Farm or some types of retreats. And so what we're doing is trying to do workshops and plan workshops together so that you can be exposed to 2 or 3 different forms at the same time and understand that they don't have to be taken separately. They can be taken collectively in different doses for different times. So it's kind of like a force continuum that rather be a staircase can be on more of a wheel form. So you can go to what you need when you need it for whatever you feel. And it's great to change your routine to get the best therapeutic result. I do horses every now and then, and I'm just amazed at it. Even nurturing stuff like Veterans Healing Farm, where you're growing and cultivating stuff. They're all just incredible experiences. So kind of your analogy about the armory and going around and looking at a list of different forms of mental health care and physical and emotional health care is what we're doing now to team up and make ourselves just that much more of a force multiplier within our community, as well as extending to first responders and now families.
And so to bring that full circle to what we were saying at the outset, it cascades down, right? So it gets down to where the broader services and in what we would say in SOF, the general purpose force, as opposed to the special operations force. Now the general purpose force, I think, is if you go to Camp Lejeune, there are gyms on Mainside Camp Lejeune that 15 years ago only MARSOC had that gym.
Yeah, same at
And
Bragg.
the Marine Corps kept coming to our gym and going, how do we build these? Well, you get some money and you build them, man. And they did. And that's a wonderful thing. It should be that way. It should be as bespoke as possible. Every infantry rifleman, every cannon cocker, every combat engineer or supply sergeant needs to have access to a program that makes them the most effective at their job as possible, right? I think that's slowly cascading down to law enforcement, there's still definitely I know a guy who's a career police officer, but his whole job within the police department of a mid-sized metropolitan city is he is the drug and alcohol substance abuse coordinator. And he's a recovering alcoholic who has made this his mission is psychiatric, psychological, and substance abuse care for fellow officers. It's an awesome mission for him, and it's righteous, and he's lived it. And I think the problem we have when you go to the first responder community is what that means is very, very different. Like if I tell you a United States Marine or a U.S. Army soldier, you know more or less what you're getting, whether you're at Fort Riley, Kansas, or Camp Pendleton, California, right? It's that person's probably 18 to 35. They have access to a certain amount of food. They all get paid the same amount of money. The training regimen, okay, being a Marine may be a little different than being a paratrooper in the airborne, but not that much. But the difference between being a cop in, Goose Creek, Arkansas, that has 3 officers, and Los Angeles that probably has 30,000 officers and a host of different problems, but maybe pretty similar stresses, is very, very different. And so the approach and the acceptance and the ability to deal with things like physical fitness, mental health, training standards, etc., is very different. And so then getting the acceptance of going, I'm a first responder and I spend my Saturday nights picking up dead bodies from drunk driving accidents, but I live in Goose Creek, Arkansas, and there's nobody to talk to about that here, and there's nobody to help me get somewhere to talk to about it. That's the acceptance that we got to cascade down from the veterans community.
Excellent point. And we're, because of the GWAT eras of the last 20 years, we unfortunately have many lessons that we've had to deal with personally when the support wasn't at the levels it is today. And I think that is a perfect analogy of where law enforcement finds itself, a desperate need for that type of help and guidance without necessarily the infrastructure that already exists. And in fact, a few months ago, we did a 3-day first responder mental health summit spearheaded by Heart of Horse Sense. And we really see that here because of the post-storm Helene effects. However, we do understand that it is a worldwide problem, all across America, and that it is multidimensioned and very different, like you're saying, based on the on-the-ground realities. And keeping on that, what would you say as a veteran who lives in North Carolina and served in North Carolina for many years? What would you say could help us improve the veteran quality of life in our state?
So I think that's a wonderful question. One is state level VSOs. I think the counties do a pretty good job. Excuse me, and I've spoken to people at the state level about this. There's just not that much money for state level veteran services officers. So when I said VSOs, I meant officers, not organizations. Again, I had somebody, Pender County. I live in New Hanover County, North Carolina. The Veterans Affairs Office in Pender County helped me pretty substantially when I was transitioning out and retiring with some of my VA and that sort of work. Super helpful and super thankful for those folks. But at the state level, they just don't exist in the numbers that they need to. And then I used to say to a buddy of mine who was a delegate at the State House, you guys need to stop taxing our retirements, which they've done. Because, North Carolina likes to say it's the most veteran-friendly state in America. And I was like, yeah, I don't know, man. There's other states that are leaving our retirements alone.
True, yeah.
But the legislature did take care of that. Now, that only affects the retiree, not the broader veteran population, but it means something in a state with so many military retirees. Another thing about the legislator is I say they need to stop robbing vets to pay for pets. And by that, I mean pet projects, not dogs and cats. Veteran funding is a cash cow for other programs. And again, if you're going to have a sign, when I cross the border from South Carolina into North Carolina, it says America's most veteran friendly state, or something along those lines. That might not be a perfect quote. If you're taking the money meant for veterans, a significant part of your population who also provide a lot of funding to the state, either by remaining here and in retirement and having a very steady income stream via your pension and disability, which then gets poured into the state coffers, or whether that's vets who stay here to find jobs, et cetera. Um, Diverting money from those veteran programs to something else inevitably cripples those programs and inevitably negatively impacts vets. And then another thing that, it's an end of life issue. It's not a while you're alive issue, but it's funding for veteran cemeteries. There's a beautiful vet cemetery in Black Mountain, North Carolina, which is a beautiful town. That should be the case anywhere that, if you give the last full measure, or if you just give the last full measure of living your life in North Carolina as a veteran, I think that's a thing that's worth marking. So, I think that's probably the near term stuff. But the biggest thing is, put the money where your mouth is. It is very easy to say we support veterans, we love our service members. It costs you exactly nothing to do so, and it is about the same as the yellow ribbon magnets on people's cars during the 20 years of the GWAT. After a while, and people say, I really support you vets. Okay, is your kid joining the military? How exactly do you support vets? Because there's things that I support. I cheer for the University of Georgia Bulldogs because I grew up in Athens, Georgia. I didn't go to Georgia. I don't pay taxes in Georgia. I don't send money to the Gridiron Club in Athens. I just clap when they do good things on the TV.
You're just
It
a
doesn't mean
fan,
much.
not
I'm
necessarily a
just a fan.
supporter in that sense, but a
Exactly.
fan.
So if you're a supporter of veterans, it
That's right.
means, hey, call your legislators and tell them this is what I want to see happen. This is what I value.
Well,
I have the U.S. congressional switchboard in my phone, and I just go there and I call them every 2 or 3 days, and leave messages for Senator Budd, Senator Tillis, and in my case, Congressman Rouser. Tell them exactly what I'm thinking. I don't know if it
good
has
for
any
you.
impact, but I do it.
No, good for you. And at least it lets them in on your perspective, which is very important. And it's the squeaky wheel, right? That gets the oil. So when you bring your attention to our politicians, they're the ones that can actually do something about it. So it is very important, your advocacy, and it's a great lesson that you're uh, thinking about other veterans really stepping up to the plate.
It's
And I'll,
it's a point worth camping out on. I have a very good friend who is a veteran and also served as the secretary of or director of veterans and military affairs for the state of North Carolina. So the VA secretary for North Carolina. And I called him one time and said, like, what can I do as a citizen, as a retired military person? Like, how do I really make my voice heard? And calling and writing your legislators actually does matter far more than I really understood. And then also, you and I probably did plenty of dog and pony shows. And then it's like, oh, this really important person is coming. So now we have to jump through all these flaming hoops to make that person happy. Never forget, especially as a retiree or a veteran status service member, those people are your employees. And when we act like they're VIPs, that's fine. They are. That's cool. My great great uncle was a senator for 39 years. I'm not, poo pooing the importance of elected officials at all, or their, I don't know, how cool they are, whatever. But they work for us.
they have a function.
They have a function. We elect them into office. We give them their job. We pay them out of our tax money, just like they paid us as veterans and service retirees out of their tax money. Never, ever forget that all 100 senators and all 435 Congress people work for you, not the other way around. And you have every right, and in fact, to my mind, every obligation to tell them what you think.
Well, I couldn't agree more with you, and it's great to see in just this short part so far of our podcast, what a range of capabilities you have, whether it be an officer, special ops, special forces, writer, advocate, advocacy of veterans, rights and quality of life, and just the motivation that you have is what really makes you quite unique to our world and so appreciative of having you in brothers and sisters like these.
Well, brother, I am making it up as I go along, and I am often just imitating people who are smarter, faster, stronger, better than me, and trying to do the things that they're doing. And I ask a lot of questions, but it is not hard to raise your voice. It is critical, and more importantly, I think sometimes it's easy to get beaten down and lose sight of the fact that it is your right. And allowing we went too many places and fought too hard for those rights to not exercise them within the appropriate bounds of the United States Constitution, which we all swore to serve and defend, or
Yes,
support and defend, rather.
well said, brother. And I'll let you know, you mentioned the past North Carolina Department of Military and Veterans Affairs secretary, and the current secretary has been a guest on this podcast and has come post Helene, Secretary Millette, Air Force Academy graduate, and obviously Air Force veteran. Very motivated, very task and goal oriented, has come down post Helene to see what we needed, has helped with a lot of outreach, and on Memorial Day came to the Black Mountain Cemetery that you were mentioning to give a really impactful speech that you can find on our website, brothers and sisters like these.org, that was live streamed with the city of Asheville, and talks about some of the challenges that we have as veterans and some of her own personal connections to people who have given the ultimate sacrifice during the GWAT eras. So I'm happy to let you know that we are actually today she should be having a confirmation vote in Raleigh. So we wish her well, and we are very happy with the direction that the NCDMVA is currently taking to advocate for the whole state, but especially for Western North Carolina. That is a very rural and often forgotten about part of the state. So good to hear the continuity and legacy and professionalism that supports our state at military and veteran level. So where do you think you would see yourself in, say, maybe 10 years?
Writing and supporting veteran writers is probably the shortest way to say what I took a long way to say.
Yeah, no, that's great. And like you said, it's a very good point, is that as we physically cannot no longer do the things that we used to do in our youth, and that gave us a lot of our, belief in ourselves and our capabilities and our identity, writing is something that can last us a lot longer because it's just not as physical as we get older. So, and we can still be very, very productive. I have all my Vietnam veterans who are part of our group and board members, and they keep it very real and give 100%. And what they're doing is amazing. So I see people like
Well,
you
it's
and
giving
me.
back, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
you have guys like Stephen Henderson and Ron Toller, who, as I look at those guys, I'm saying, well, they're sort of paving the way, right? They reach down to younger veterans like you and I to say, this was a really good thing for us. Well, now I'm turning around and doing that for, Marines and sailors and veteran members. But a lot of the vets in the brothers and sisters like these groups that I do are my age plus or minus 5 years. Though I've got a couple of Vietnam vets in their 80s, which is phenomenal. My crowd up at Camp Lejeune, usually folks in their 30s. And as the years go by, less and less purely GWAT type guys, by which, and gals, by which I mean their whole career was characterized by that. But anyway, it's a way for me to reach down now and say, I don't jump out of airplanes anymore. I don't scuba dive anymore. I don't explosively breach doors anymore, and frankly don't want to anymore. But for those of you that do, let's talk about what this all looks like.
Skipped.
For all of you, that are still in and still serving, you've got 5, 10, 15 years of runway ahead of you, or you're going to get out and have, another 40, 50, whatever years of life. Let's talk about what that's going to look like. Let's talk about transition. Let's talk about where you can go with all this, simply because I, as a guy who spent almost the entirety of my career in units where my job was to go forward and see what's there and then tell the other people, I can kind of give you a hint about what you're going to experience and what you're going to feel. And so to go back to your question of where do I see this in 10 years, I hope I'm telling people what I experienced over 10 years so that their experience can be that much better.
Well said. I hope we can be as productive as these OG members of Brothers and Sisters did, to take a novel writing program in the basement at the VA, make a book, Brothers Like These, open it up to women, make Brothers and Sisters Like These, and now have Gulf War and GWAT. And if the future calls for soldiers to become veterans and combat veterans like they called on our generation, I pray and hope that we will continue to be here to provide the same moral support that they did to us. That would be an honor of my lifetime. And I'm sure you agree with that, Brother Worth.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, as we start to wrap this up, tell us some ways that our viewers can get in touch with you or get to know you a little bit better. How can we do that? How can we reach out to you if we'd like to know
So
more?
if you want to email me, I have a website. It's russellworthparker.com, and there's a contact me page or something along those lines. I'm on Instagram, which is at worth.parker. I also do a second Instagram where I largely talk about books and military conflict and books about military conflict, and that is called at Book War, which is the letter B 00K WAR, and that's probably, if I was going to say give me a follow, that's where I'd say do it, because I will talk about all these books and the books that publishers send me to review and what we do at Lethal Minds Journal. I do want to send a plug out for that. Lethal Minds Journal is published on Substack. We have currently 3 ongoing efforts. We have the monthly newsletter that we highly encourage and desire, and the whole reason we exist is veteran and active duty submissions. So if you're writing poetry, analysis, opinion, after action reviews of your deployment, I don't care what it is. We have a volunteer editorial staff that is almost all vet, as well as some very talented civilians who will help you, even if you're not a writer, get that thing across the finish line. We also are doing we do a series called 12 Questions with a Writer, where I just interview folks about their books and their writing, which all these folks will eventually pop up. And then we do another one that we just started called Vetrapreneurs. And we're talking to veteran business owners who took a chance on themselves and are typically, it's a 10-question format, but I did one yesterday that will be probably a 2-parter and be extra long, just because it's that interesting. And it's with Chase Roth of the Veterans Business Collective here in Wilmington, who,
right?
who built a thing designed to help vets. In just as Brothers and Sisters Like These is helping vets get their word out by writers, VBC is connecting veteran business owners and business starters in ways to help one another, as well as to kind of build a bench of, well, I know I can call this plumber because they've already been vetted by VBC and they're a vet. They're in my group. I don't need to comparison shop. I just know I'm going to get an okay deal. So anyway, that's another effort. And if folks want to be a subject of the writer emails or the Vetrapreneur emails, they can reach out to us at lethalmindsjournal.submissions@gmail.com, or for anything else they've written. So okay. I think that was a lot. There you go.
No, yeah. And of course, we will be glad to forward anybody who would like to have more contact with you by contacting us. If there's any problems with contacting you directly, we're always here.
No, not at all. Please do.
As a liaisons. Well, Brother Worth, our time has come to an end. I'd like to thank you for your work, for your service, and I'd like to thank the listeners. And as always, to our guest, the last word.
I'll just say thank you very much. It's been a really psychologically, emotionally fruitful partnership. This last now we've done 3 iterations of the 2-month brothers and sisters like these group online. We'll do another one in the fall. That's been wonderful. The offshoot benefit at the TBI clinic has been wonderful. And so I'm just thankful to be a part of it and looking forward to seeing where it goes.
All
and
right,
thank
brother.
you for having me on here.
Oh, our pleasure. Stay tuned till next episode. Take care, everybody.